Hey, Composing Gloves here, and today I'm going to be covering a request video. Someone asked, how do you use limiters on individual channels? I'm going to sort of just spitball a number of concepts at you, assuming that you know what compression is and a number of other things. And then the other question was, what do you use for your stereo processing? So I'm going to try and answer these kind of fast. They will be answered later on in future series to come on. But the short answer to your first question is you do not use limiters on individual channels. You use compressors. If a limiter's function, if I pull open a limiter here, and there's a couple different kinds of limiters. Well, there's two kinds of limiters really. There's what's called just a regular limiter, and then there's a look-ahead limiter. A limiter with a look-ahead, which is used for mastering. So we'll talk about that in just a sec. So basically, a limiter, all its job is to do is exactly what it sounds like. It limits how loud your signal can get. It says it gets no louder than this. And so you'll see here they'll have this thing called the ceiling. It literally means the ceiling on how loud you can get. So if I set my ceiling really low, I cannot get any louder than that. It's as loud as I can get. So if I pulled open a sound and, just make it sort of a more interesting sound, and I said, oh, my ceiling, right now it'll come through easy peasy. But if I put my threshold all the way down, you see it cannot go past this threshold. This purple, for those of you who don't know, is the signal coming in, and the green, which you can't see because it's overlapping, is the signal going out. So you see it cannot go out. And when it's white, that means they're overlapping. So this is essentially green. So if we lower it, and you see if I play notes, nothing gets through. Now this limiter has some look ahead functions allowing it to respond to transients. So let's talk about compressor limiters first. So basically, if you take a compressor, let's talk about the uses of this. Why would you want to even put a limit on your signal? Like, why is that even a thing? Well, it's for safety. So there's two reasons. One is to get things louder than they could be otherwise, and you use different types of saturation to do that, or soft clipping technically. And the other one is safety. So if I'm a monitor engineer at a live sound gig and I'm mixing monitors for the band, let's say they've got in-ear monitors. Well, if I send them a super hot signal that goes above my threshold and clips and is dangerously loud that could damage hearing, I may affect that musician's life and career and a number of other things. So I could get sued pretty crazy, and it's just a jerk move. Not that anyone does this intentionally, but so what you do is you put a limiter in the path, and that makes it safer because now you have a ceiling, so you can guarantee not hit them with ridiculous levels. So that's one reason you would use a limiter. The other reason is they have this thing called soft clipping, which is something we're really not going to be talking about. But essentially, you would throw this on your 2-track, and you could hit it really hard. And you know what? I'm saying things. I'm not sure if you understand all these terms. Basically, you can put it over your master channel. There, you put it over your master channel, and you can drive it right up against the ceiling. And depending on how it deals with signal being compressed, because essentially what it is, it's just a really fast compressor. That's what it is. How it deals with that will allow you to make things get a lot louder because your average level will go up, thus causing you to perceive higher loudness at the expense of reduced peaks. And then the way it manages this is what has sort of started the loudness wars, or what is the loudness wars. There's a whole load of other stuff that goes into it though. But anyways, a look-ahead limiter. So a normal limiter is just a compressor. And we know that compressors, so if we pull out, I'm just going to pull out a really basic one, fruity compressor. If we were to set a threshold and we said, I don't want anything to get past 26.2 decibels, well, there is a typical ratio that is the standard for at what point you're limiting, and that is 10-1. So once you reach a ratio of 10-1, meaning you need 10 additional decibels to get one out, you have now reached limiting. So you are now limiting the signal. And I could talk a little bit more about this, but it's really just that simple, because the idea is now you've created a wall that stuff can't get past. Now you need a fast attack for this because obviously you need to stop it before it gets through. That's the problem with analog compressors and regular compressors, is they do not have a look ahead. Well, there are complicated ways of achieving a look ahead in both the digital and analog domain, but basically a regular compressor does not have a look ahead, so it therefore must have something get through before it can bring it down. It has to have something trigger it to say, oh, I need to pull the audio down now, if you know what I mean. So that's the problem with compressors. Now, that's where the look ahead limiters come in. They allow you to perfectly respond to everything. It looks ahead. It actually puts a delay in your signal, processes the audio, and then spits out the actual audio. And that's how a limiter works. That's basically what it does. Now, there's a ton of applications, and this video isn't about limiting. I just want to say, for these reasons, you do not put limiters on channels to do anything to them. You might use soft clipping and other distortion methods. And in that case, I suppose you could use the saturation option in this particular limiter. There's a whole load of different kinds of limiters, and they're typically used for those two applications. Now, the problem I think that you may have come up with this is maybe you were unfamiliar with what a limiter was, and also a lot of plugins these days fulfill a lot more than just one function. For example, the Fruity limiter is also a compressor, and it has a gate. It's a dynamic processor. So limiting is just happens to be like it's sort of the function it has in mind. But I use it all the time as a compressor. You can set your threshold, knee ratio, and do all these great things to your sound. So I will put compressors on my stuff, and you typically don't want to limit because it's not very tasteful until you're trying to just get the max amount of loudness, and you start pulling out all your tricks out of your bag to try and get it competitively viable with other people's music. So short answer, don't put it on there. Now let's talk about stereo width. Hopefully that was enough information for you. Yeah, that's just the way that sort of is. Okay, so let's go over to one other thing, because this is sort of relevant to FL users. Whoops, not that one. Maximus. Maximus, this is a limiter. Bang, because it's an infinite ratio. Right here. And you can have a look ahead. So it functions perfectly great as a look ahead multi-band compressing limiter thing. It's like crazy. That's what's so cool about Maximus. Again, remember to have linear phase filters on though if you're going to use it for mastering. So let's come over here. I have tutorials though where I do not engage that in the tutorial. So it's not like linear phase could color your signal in ways that you like. It's all down to your ears at the end of the day. So I'm telling you, there are probably mastering engineers out there who have no idea what some of their plugins do, but they like the way they sound, and that's all that matters. So if it sounds good, it is good. It's the good rule. Good musician, good performance, good plugins, good engineer. Just the more good things you can get, the better it is. The gooder it is. So sort of the idea behind plugins like Sound Goodizer, except for, yeah, I prefer to know what my stuff does, but occasionally, hey, it's kind of fun to just have that little mystic element of, I don't want to know exactly what it does. I just want it to do something. And then you just judge it solely off of how it sounds, which is ideally what you should do all the time. But yeah, anyways, it gets in the whole judgment psychologically, it sort of messes you up. Let's talk about stereo. So you asked for stereo processing. This makes me wonder a couple things. So there is pseudo stereo and there's like fake stereo. So fake stereo is when you take something that was originally mono and you make it stereo. I'm assuming that's what you're asking about. That's not really actually stereo though. And so stereo is when you actually have something that was actually in stereo, like you used a stereo miking technique to catch a thing in an actual environment as it was in that environment. So like you had a flute, maybe this flute was in like my room, for example. I'm playing the flute and I use two microphones and I set them up in such a way that it will accurately capture this space in a way that, and so like if I were to move, it would sound, you would hear me proportionally move in the sound field. So stereo microphone. Now I'm going to ignore that and talk about ways to enhance things using techniques that weren't originally stereo. So here I've made a sound, a really fast sort of simple sound. Sounds like that, and it's got a big amount of pan on it, right? I could lower the panning. And so it's relatively, it's got a smaller stereo field. Now, pan law gets involved here, what panning law FL uses, and what panning law the plugin uses with this particular process. So it gets a little like wigged out. You can observe it pretty easily though by simply just watching your faders or your levels. So you see it's got some sort of, in this case, it's the phasing that causes a number of the panning. And then I'm not sure if it's using a phase difference here or whatever it is. It's like unison is a combination of flanging and chorusing. That's like another topic though. So anyways, once you have something that's sort of in stereo, you got a stereo. Once you have something that you can have stereo differences in, you have a lot of options. For example, you could throw a reverb on it, and this cool reverb has a mid-side mode, meaning you could process only the mid signal or only the side. However, if you slap a reverb on a mono signal in FL, it will show you two discrete two discrete tracks. That's not actually going to add any reverb. So if we like, if the levels are the same, meaning an FL mono signals are represented as even signal in two channels. It's a little weird. Yeah, it's just weird. They don't have like a normal mono mode. Because now in Pro Tools, you have channels that are mono and you can assign them to like one output or the other output. You can do that in pretty much most DAWs. But once it comes out your masters, it's got to be split both ways if you want to hear it in both. So I guess that was the perspective FL took. But in reality, you could set it to one side and that's like true mono. Especially when you get to like a Mackie. My first time working on a Mackie and understanding like a little bit about how this, because I was always used to tracks like this. And the thing about this is mono is just simply means one speaker, which just comes out one speaker. That's all it means. So when you have something and you play it and it looks, and when you grow up thinking, oh yeah, it always comes out both sides, it's like totally not true. FL splits your signal and puts it out two sides. So it's a weird deal, okay? So anyways, the moral of the story is if you have it on side mode and your signal is mono, meaning both in FL's case, I don't know why I did air quotations there. It's coming out equal intensity on both channels, which is technically a form of stereo. You will get no processing on the side because there's no differences between the sides. What a plugin will do is it will detect the differences in your signal on the sides in amplitude and time. So it will use that to process it and add reverb to that signal. Now you can do a whole lot to the side. Now here's what it sounds like with the side processing. Let's just do all wet. So here's it on the mid. So you see it sounds radically different. Whoops, my bad, that button. And so you get away with a lot of the things on the side. Now you want to be careful with how you treat that depending on your project's nature and style because it can heavily muddy your mix if you use it incorrectly. Okay, and delays I am learning more and more and more can be much cleaner than reverb. So let's come over here. So that's one thing. Now a cool thing that you have here, one of my favorites, is you have the stereo shaper. Where are you, stereo shaper? Effects, filter, gain. Oh, there we go, stereo shaper. So this thing uses a delay and a phase difference between signals to create effects. Now, I do not mingle with this all that much these days. What I do is I just go into the I go into the effects section. One day I'll have a tutorials on this. But anyways, I just go through here and add different delays and things, and you can create a stereo image. Now this one can take a mono signal and make it not mono. So if we had like, let's say that is a very stereo signal. Let's just say we had that, right? And we send it in. So now it's going to come through our thing. We're going to use stereorize the preset. And so you see it's giving us a stereo image utilizing a phase difference. So it's a pretty interesting deal. And you could see your mixer matrix right there, like, ooh, fancy dancy. So that's sort of another topic, but that's one I like to go to. And there's one more that as recently I use more and more and more. It's the stereo expander. Now this one needs stereo information as well. It will also use the differences. And again, you can come through and mess with the presets, get some cool stuff. Basically, the idea is that you are just setting things in a stereo image that would be interesting but also to make it fit together in a way that will allow the most important stuff to sing through, but let all the details be heard by the listener as well. Now, my ultimate favorite stereo in this sort of fake stereo tool is by far the pan knob. Didn't see that one coming, did you? Yep, it's the pan knob. I love the pan knob. I use it all the time. You should use it more. Like, it's great. I like to do subtle changes like this. Like if I have like some sort of a line, let's just say that's my line. It's going like that. I love to do crap like this where I simply automate the pan knob on the snare. So create an automation clip. And just slowly, little changes like that. Little ones. I like having things that sweep across, stuff like that. That just adds such a dynamic element to your mix. Now, this is technically not stereo in the sense that it's coming out both speakers with different intensities, but it is because it's panning, which means that it gets softer in one and louder in the other. Well, not louder. FL's pan law is that as one volume increases, the other one actually increases a little bit. So you got to keep that in mind. So it uses, if you were to send a signal that was perfectly in phase with itself, no, out of phase with itself, the summing would actually change coloring your signal if you were to pan in FL. So that's something you need to be aware of. So it is stereo, but this isn't looked at as like stereo, like real stereo, if you know what I mean. Okay, I don't know. I just dug a hole for myself there in all sorts of weird terms. But anyways, that's the basic concept. If you have any questions about anything I've said or maybe disagree with what I've said, drop in the comments your favorite stereo application. Let me know. Support me on Patreon, subscribe, and have a blessed day. We'll talk about what music theory is and why it matters to you so you have reasons to continue on. And I'm going to be teaching it from two perspectives. So the first one, I guess I'll start with the one that's not very common, is the MIDI. I'm going to be teaching it inside a DAW, and you're going to be expected to know different things and learn them differently, or at least I'm going to teach them within a DAW. So I'm going to be teaching it from here. I've already have a music